The first time Karen showed up at my backyard fence, she acted like the pool behind me belonged to her. I was skimming leaves, sun barely warming the water, when she slammed her palm against a wooden board like she was calling a court to order. She didn't bother with a greeting. She pointed 2 acrylic nails at the water and announced that neighbors were complaining. According to her, I was being selfish by not allowing all the neighborhood children to use my pool whenever they wanted. That was news to me. I had bought this house specifically because it came with a pool, not because I secretly wanted to become the community swim coach. I told her that the only complainer here was her. She responded by gasping dramatically, like she had been slapped by pure disrespect, and stormed off with the promise that this wasn't over. She made a speech about neighborhoods needing shared spaces. She talked about social responsibility like she was running an election campaign for suburban president. I stayed quiet, watching her rant while gently rotating the skimmer net because silence seemed to annoy her more than arguing. She said her son cried every day because he could see my pool from his treehouse. Somehow his lack of hydration was now my fault. I told her I sympathized with his struggles, but my property wasn't a public park. The next gasp sounded even more insulted than the first. She turned on her neon-white sneakers and stomped away like she expected background music to play. I assumed that was the end. I assumed wrong. The next morning there was a bright yellow note taped to my front door. It claimed to be an official violation notice for misuse of a community resource. It said I owed $200 in fines for excluding residents from shared recreational facilities. It listed no HOA name, no phone number, and no real authority. Just a signature written with enough confidence to power a small city. HOA Chairwoman Karen. I set the paper on my kitchen counter like a soggy grocery coupon and carried on with my day. By evening, there were 3 more notes, each one more aggressive. The print became larger. The threats became bolder. The confidence remained unchecked. I marched over to her house, holding all 4 notes stacked like a deck of terrible cards. She answered the door with a victorious smile already loaded, like she'd been waiting for me to fold. I told her she had no jurisdiction over my wallet, my pool, or my afternoon. She lifted her chin and said she had spoken to several HOA board members. They agreed that my pool counts as a visual amenity. Therefore, the neighborhood had a right to access and enjoy it. I asked her to show me the law requiring me to let strangers into my yard. She said the law was common sense. I said I preferred laws that existed. She tried to snatch the notes out of my hand, but I held them high like a bizarre trophy and walked away. Karen wasn't used to pushback, so she changed tactics. She pretended to soften, hands clasped like a kindergarten teacher explaining crayons. She said she was willing to negotiate. If I paid a monthly community improvement contribution, she would allow me to keep private use of my own pool. She had turned my pool into ransom. I told her I'd think about it just to stop the conversation before my face melted off. Walking home, I realized Karen believed she had leverage. She thought embarrassment or pressure would make me surrender. She underestimated my pettiness, my patience, and my love for not wasting money. The real trouble began when she posted on a neighborhood group page calling me selfish. She claimed I screamed at her child. She said I cursed at elderly neighbors. She used every emotional manipulation tactic in her arsenal. Suddenly strangers were walking by my yard slower, glaring like I hoarded gold. A kid tried to climb my fence while his mom watched, cheering him on. When I shouted to stop, she yelled that the pool water was too clean not to share. I started locking the side gate and adding cameras. Karen had successfully turned my summer oasis into a battlefield. One evening Karen returned with a clipboard, and behind her stood 3 HOA board members dressed like backup dancers in khaki shorts. She read from a document declaring they were offering me one last chance to comply before pursuing legal action. I asked what court they planned to embarrass themselves in. Her face twitched. She said the community deserved fairness, and that exclusivity created hostility. I told her hostility already arrived holding a clipboard. She accused me of having a condescending attitude. I pretended to consider that profound accusation, thanked her for the feedback, and shut the door before my sarcasm leaked into words. That night I sat by the pool, water reflecting porch lights, and thought about strategy. Karen loved rules. She worshipped structure. She believed power came from paperwork. I realized the simplest way to defeat someone who misuses rules is to apply real ones. If she wanted to treat my private pool like a business, I could treat it like a business. She wanted residents to enjoy it? Great. Businesses charge customers. I smiled into the rippling water because suddenly I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing something better. She wanted access. She wanted control. So I crafted a plan that would weaponize her entitlement against her. If the neighborhood wanted a community pool, they would get a community pool experience. With fees. With paperwork. With restrictions. With rules that would make a government office blush. And Karen, the self-appointed queen of regulations, would be the first person required to follow them. The idea alone made me laugh out loud, and the sound of my own amusement echoed over the still water like a declaration of war. Tomorrow I would introduce my new policy, and I was going to do it with absolute professionalism and a smile sharp enough to slice through her laminated attitude. Karen wanted a war of bureaucracy. I was finally ready to play, and she had no clue how expensive her demands were about to become. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed the strongest coffee my machine would legally allow, and drafted a document titled Neighborhood Recreational Access Agreement. It was 6 pages long. It contained rules no sane person would ever argue against and Karen would absolutely despise. Each bullet point was a tiny act of revenge disguised as polite policy. I printed 30 copies because if you're going to be petty, you should also be prepared. By mid-afternoon, I heard Karen's signature stomp approaching like an approaching weather alert. She banged on my front door without restraint. I opened it with the kind of calm that worsens someone's anger. She demanded to know why a pool access fee notice was taped onto every mailbox on the street. I told her I was being a good neighbor. She said good neighbors don't extort families for swimming. I reminded her that she was the one who insisted the pool was a community resource. She responded that she meant it metaphorically. I replied that laws aren't metaphors. She pointed to the laminated sign on my fence that read, "Pool Day Passes, $25 per person, $10 extra for water float rentals." She said it was ridiculous. I told her it was a fair price. She demanded free access for HOA members. I asked her for proof she lived in an HOA. She threatened to report me to the city. I encouraged her to go ahead. She took out her phone and snapped pictures like she was documenting a crime. I smiled for each photo. Then came the first customer. A teenager asked if he could swim for an hour. He handed over $25 without hesitation and signed the waiver stating he acknowledged the risks of using a private pool. Karen looked betrayed, like the boy had chosen capitalism over loyalty. When he cannonballed into the deep end, a glorious wave splashed the fence. Karen screamed about water trespassing onto her property. I told her she was welcome to file a complaint, but the court of common sense might be closed that day. By evening, 10 different kids had shown up with permission from their parents and enough cash to keep me stocked in chlorine for a month. Karen hovered nearby like a storm cloud with vocal cords. She called me a sellout. She said I was exploiting children. I pointed out that she had been demanding free access to the same pool. She said that was different, though she couldn't explain how. She stormed off in a slow, dramatic march, every step a silent threat. The next morning, I found a fresh stack of violation notices on my doorstep claiming that charging neighbors was illegal without a business license. They were printed in red ink, which I guess she thought made them more official. I left the stack there and walked to the municipal office. A friendly clerk explained that I actually could operate a small recreational facility as long as I registered for a seasonal permit and posted safety guidelines. He even helped me fill out the form. Karen thought she was weaponizing bureaucracy. Instead, she handed me a permit to escalate. While I was at the city office, Karen was posting on the neighborhood group page again. She warned parents that I was running an unsafe pool. She claimed I had contaminated water and broken drains. She even suggested I was taking inappropriate photos of minors. It was a desperate, disgusting lie. That was the moment I stopped seeing Karen as a nuisance and started seeing her as a threat. I realized she wasn't just entitled. She was willing to destroy reputations to get what she wanted. I called the parents of every kid who had visited. They all reassured me they never believed Karen's lies. They even apologized for her behavior. One of the dads told me Karen had called his wife screaming that their child was at risk of drowning under my supervision. They laughed it off because their kid has been a swim champion since age 6. Karen's slander campaign didn't weaken my position. It strengthened my resolve. I responded on the group page with a carefully structured message. I thanked everyone for supporting small community amenities. I mentioned that due to overwhelming interest, I was expanding my hours. I included photos of my freshly posted safety rules, life jackets, and city-approved permit. Karen commented underneath, typing in capital letters that I was a fraud. Her comments gathered exactly one reaction: the laughing emoji. Seeing her digital defeat might have been the highlight of the month. That evening, Karen arrived again with backup. 2 uniformed HOA representatives who introduced themselves like they were undercover agents. One carried a clipboard. The other wore sunglasses despite it being sunset. They informed me that the HOA's legal counsel demanded I shut down immediately. They waved a paper printed from Google Doc. I asked which HOA they represented. They spoke over each other, naming different subdivisions. I reminded them this street was not part of any HOA. The clipboard guy stumbled, the sunglasses guy took off his shades in defeat, and they both walked away without saying goodbye. But Karen was not done. She returned after dark, pacing by the fence like a coyote searching for weakness. At around 10, she started shaking the lattice panels, trying to peek through. My motion sensor light flicked on. She froze, one hand caught like she was mid-burglary. I opened the sliding door and asked if she needed a tour. She ran without answering. I went to sleep assuming the worst was over. The morning proved me wrong. A police cruiser parked out front as I was pouring cereal. Karen stood proudly beside the officer, arms crossed. She must have called the police claiming I was endangering children or running a secret nightclub. The officer asked if he could inspect the pool. I agreed and walked him through everything. He saw the safety signs. He saw the permit. He saw nothing dangerous. He even complimented my water clarity. Karen interrupted repeatedly, insisting that allowing paid guests was unethical. The officer finally turned to her and said ethics are not a criminal matter, then suggested she go home. The police car drove off. Karen stayed. She glared at me like I had personally dismantled her worldview. She asked if I enjoyed ruining her life. I asked if she enjoyed making her life so easy to ruin. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. She stormed away, whispering a threat to take things to the next level. I believed her. And honestly, I welcomed it. Because the game had changed. She tried social shaming. She tried fake rules. She tried slander. But none of it worked. Now she would have to escalate. And every step she climbed was another rung on a ladder she didn't realize I was sawing through. Karen didn't want access anymore. She wanted victory. I preferred results. And I was just getting started. Karen's next level arrived the following Saturday morning disguised as a neighborhood safety meeting. I spotted folding chairs arranged in a semicircle on her driveway, a cheap podium placed in the center like she was hosting a political rally for people who couldn't mind their business. About 15 neighbors sat awkwardly, as if they'd been lured with promises of snacks and found only complaint. When Karen saw me heading to my car, she dramatically tapped the mic on the podium, amplifying her entitlement. She declared that I had opened a profit-hungry water attraction, which posed terrible risks to the community. She insisted chlorine fumes could drift into homes and destroy lungs. She spoke with a tone that suggested she had recently Googled, "What can chlorine do?" and only read the scariest half of the search result. A few attendees nodded anxiously because fear spreads easier than fact. Just as she sounded confident enough to start charging admission to her panic speech, a toddler interrupted with a loud request for ice cream. The parents left instantly, proving snacks were the true priority of suburban politics. Karen announced they would hold a vote demanding my unauthorized aquatic facility be shut down. I leaned against my car and clapped sarcastically after her sentence. She pointed at me like I was a criminal caught in the act of owning property. I asked the crowd who wanted a pool available to them if they followed real rules instead of imaginary ones. 11 hands shot up. Karen's face twitched like her brain was buffering. I thanked everyone for their support. She dismissed the meeting early, humiliated, and ordered everyone to leave her driveway. Half the neighbors walked straight to my pool asking what hours I was open. Karen screamed that they were betraying her. Betrayal is a strong word for choosing shade and water over a sunburn and scolding. Later, I found a new tactic on my front lawn. Bright orange cones surrounded a massive temporary construction sign declaring future community pool site. The sign had an arrow pointing into my yard. Karen must have dragged it there before sunrise, probably giggling at her own genius. I moved it back to the curb. She moved it again during lunch. This became a tug-of-war of pettiness, the kind of stupid ritual that fills an HOA Karen with purpose. Finally, I chained the sign to a post and placed it squarely in front of her property line instead. She came out screaming that vandalism would not be tolerated. I told her neither would littering. The true escalation began when I noticed tire tracks in the grass beside my gate. At first, I assumed a delivery truck cut the corner too sharply. But as evening approached, I heard scraping metal and rushed outside to see Karen pushing a small ladder against my fence. She was halfway up when she spotted me. She claimed she was checking for safety violations on behalf of the neighborhood. Apparently, she had appointed herself as pool inspector. I asked if she had a permit to climb other people's fences. She insisted that public safety didn't require paperwork. I calmly pointed out that private property did. She climbed down, trying to salvage dignity while clutching the ladder like a lifeline. She marched it home, but not before declaring she would document everything and bring it to the highest authorities. Her wide eyes suggested she meant more than yelling on Facebook this time. The authorities arrived 2 days later. But not the kind she wanted. A zoning inspector came by, responding to her complaint. I gave a full tour. He took notes, tested the pool fence latch, and checked the drain cover like a professional who had real concerns, not imaginary ones. He concluded everything met safety standard. Before leaving, he quietly warned me that someone kept calling the city daily, claiming I was installing a water slide without permit. I assured him I didn't even own a water slide. Yet, it was clear Karen wanted more than access. She wanted to destroy what she couldn't control. Whenever she couldn't win with shame, threats, or paperwork, she invented new crimes. Most people would hide or break under that pressure. But not me. I grew up in a family where withholding the last slice of pizza was considered a declaration of war. My tolerance for petty conflict was Olympic level. So, I decided to make my pool even more appealing. I added new amenities. Towel rentals, cold drink service, foam noodles, and a Bluetooth speaker playing popular summer playlists. I even introduced a loyalty punch card. 10 swims and the next one is free. The kids loved it. Parents loved not supervising the kids. And every happy cannonball splashing echo across the fence was a reminder to Karen that she was losing a battle she started. One afternoon, a group of moms sat on my patio chatting while their kids swam. Karen approached the fence and called their names individually. She demanded they remove their children from the scam pool. They didn't even turn around. One mom waved dismissively, telling Karen to go complain to someone who cares. That single wave probably hurt her more than every sarcastic remark I had given combined. Karen vanished for a while after that. There were no more threats taped to my door, no more Facebook rants, no more stomping visits. It was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting an ambush involving a measuring tape and a bullhorn. Even the kids asked where the angry lady went. The answer came in a thick envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a cease and desist letter from an actual attorney. Not one of her DIY printouts. Claimed my pool business violated zoning rules. It demanded immediate shutdown. It threatened a lawsuit if I continued charging fees. I read every line twice. Then I called the number at the bottom. The law firm confirmed Karen had retained them. They also confirmed she insisted on suing for damages. Emotional distress, reduced property value, disruption of neighborhood harmony. They asked how I wanted to proceed. I asked how expensive a legal defense would be if I counterclaimed for harassment, slander, and trespassing. After a pause, the attorney admitted that would significantly shift financial pressure onto the plaintiff. I could practically hear Karen choking on her rage when the lawyer called her with that update. That same evening, Karen returned to my fence. No stomping. No screaming. She acted calm. Too calm. She proposed a deal. I close the pool to customers and keep it private. In exchange, she'll drop everything. No lawsuit. No smear campaign. Just peace. It sounded reasonable. Logical even. But then she slipped. She said she still wanted access for her own family. Free access, of course. The peace she offered wasn't peace. It was surrender disguised as compromise. She didn't want harmony. She wanted obedience. I told her no. She stood silent for a moment, rage trembling in her lips. Then she whispered a promise that sent a chill through the warm summer air. "You're going to regret making an enemy out of me." She walked away, posture rigid, as if fueled by a mission only she understood. I didn't know how or when, but she was going to escalate again. And the next round wasn't going to be loud or obvious. It would be the kind of attack you didn't see until it was too late. Karen disappeared for nearly a week. No threats taped to the door. No random cones claiming eminent domain over my grass. No HOA cosplay patrol snooping with clipboards. It was the longest silence since the day she first decided my pool was her personal water park. You would think I'd enjoy the break. I didn't. Silence from someone like Karen isn't peace. It's preparation. Entitlement doesn't retreat. It reloads. So, instead of relaxing, I found myself scanning the street through the blinds like a paranoid meerkat. The quiet simmered into dread. Because Karen wasn't the type to lose. She was the type to cheat until she won. The first sign of her return came disguised as a maintenance issue. I woke up to the sound of my pool pump making a horrifying grinding noise. I rushed outside to find half the system shut down. The filter was clogged with shredded pieces of neon orange warning tape. Not just floating. Stuffed deep into the intake like someone had force-fed the pool a hardware store. My security cameras caught nothing but a blurry figure ducking low in the darkness. The timing was obvious. Karen had decided diplomacy was dead. Acts of sabotage were officially in season. I replaced the filter and installed a new camera angled at the pump. Then I noticed another problem. My chlorine stockpile, which I kept locked in a plastic cabinet, was gone. The lock was snapped clean off. Whoever broke in knew exactly where to target. I called the police to report the theft, hoping the incident report might come in handy later. The officer asked if I suspected anyone. I said I didn't want to name names without evidence. His eyes flicked toward Karen's driveway. He understood. But understanding didn't equal action. He left after telling me to get a stronger lock. Later that evening, I heard voices by the fence. I stepped outside to see Karen standing with a group of teenagers. They held beach towels and goggles. She announced they were here to use the pool under her authority. She waved her phone, claiming she had recorded the police visit and taken it as proof my property was under investigation. Therefore, she said the pool was now unsafe without a community-appointed supervisor. She volunteered herself for the role. I told her the investigation was for theft. She ignored that detail like it had never been spoken. The teens looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight as if they realized they had been dragged into a stranger's yard on a lie. I told them the pool was closed for repairs. One asked if they could come back another time. I said sure, as long as they brought the access fee and a waiver signed by someone who wasn't delusional. Karen hissed like a cat, dropped into a bathtub and dragged the kids away while ranting that she would take this to the city council. I wondered if the city council had a special department for handling grown women obsessed with other people's pools. But her real play hadn't even started yet. 2 days later, a white work truck pulled up. 3 men in reflective vests knocked on my door. They said they were here to begin the installation. I asked installation of what? They showed paperwork requesting a public safety fence extension around the shared pool area. My address was written at the top, forged terribly. I politely informed them that no such installation was approved and that the person who submitted the request was mentally allergic to boundaries. They shrugged and left, but not before giving me a copy of the fraudulent request. Karen had put her name in the sloppy signature. Harassment was turning into legally traceable stupidity. That night, at around 11, I heard splashing. Not gentle water movement. Full cannonball chaos. I ran outside to find 2 teenagers in the pool, while Karen cheered them on from the fence. I demanded they get out. They apologized immediately and climbed out dripping. Their ride was Karen, who had told them I reopened the pool and was offering a free trial. Free, of course, meaning she paid nothing and I lost revenue. I pointed to the access fee required sign. She called it extortion. The teens looked mortified to be stuck between adults in a custody battle over chlorinated water. I asked them how they got in. They said the gate was unlocked. I examined the latch and found fresh scratch marks and bending. Someone had pried it open. I didn't need a detective to connect the dots. I warned Karen that entering my property without permission was trespassing. She pretended not to understand legal terms spoken in full sentences. The teens left in awkward silence, wishing teleportation existed. Karen walked home smiling like she had won a round. Sabotage, lies, break-ins. She was escalating beautifully. The next morning, I discovered the city inspector again. This time, he arrived unannounced with 2 firefighters. Karen had reported a chemical spill. They detected nothing hazardous beyond the normal life cycle of chlorine doing chlorine things. The inspector apologized for the disruption. Then he pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to formally cite the person making false reports. I declined. Not yet. Timing is the soul of petty revenge. Karen wasn't done. She stood across the street, watching the firefighters leave. Her satisfaction faded the moment the inspector shook my hand. She'd expected victory. She got validation of the enemy. She gripped her phone so tightly I feared for the screen. Then she shouted across the street that she would hold me financially responsible for every wasted emergency response. I nodded and suggested she keep all receipts for when I countersue. That afternoon brought the most ridiculous move yet. I returned from work to find my yard transformed into a safety circus. Karen had placed a row of cheap plastic barrels at the edge of my driveway and hung a banner. Warning: contaminated swim area. Underneath, in smaller letters, keep children away. She had basically labeled my property as toxic waste. My neighbors knew it was nonsense, but imagine if someone looking to buy saw that. She was no longer trying to win. She was trying to damage what I owned. I removed everything, stacked it neatly on her lawn, and filed another police report for vandalism. While I documented her handiwork, I checked the cameras. Finally, the footage caught her clearly, marching across the lawn at dawn with those barrels like she was building a fort of stupidity. I downloaded the video and saved multiple backup. Because this wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. Karen crossed into territory where consequences hold hands with legal fees. That night, my pool lights flickered out. The pump shut down again. I rushed to the equipment pad and found wiring sliced clean through. Not ripped or chewed. Cut. Someone brought tools. Someone wanted destruction. I didn't have to guess who. I stood under the dim porch light, fists clenched, watching water settle into darkness. Karen wanted a fight. A real one. And she thought fear would make me fold. She had underestimated the one thing more powerful than her entitlement. A homeowner with evidence. Enough evidence to resurrect every complaint, every trespass, every fraudulent document, every recorded lie. Enough to dismantle her reputation, her finances, and her fantasy power. Enough to ensure she regretted every second she spent obsessing over a backyard she didn't own. Karen wasn't the only one preparing anymore. I was done defending. I pulled together every piece of proof I had and laid it out like a case. Video clips, timestamps, police reports, the torn lock, the cut wiring, and the forged paperwork were organized into folders with labels and date. Evidence doesn't need a speech. It needs order. When the pattern is visible, a neighbor's outrage reads less like righteous concern and more like deliberate harassment. I called the city attorney first and calmly explained the sequence. Theft of chemicals, tampering with equipment, forged documents submitted to contractors, and repeated false reports that summoned emergency responders. He asked me to bring everything in. Leaving his office with a flash drive on his desk felt like the moment a private nuisance becomes a public record. The attorney said false reporting and forging permits were serious and that the city would review my materials. Next I contacted a local TV station. I hate the camera, but light can reform neighborhood rumor into documented fact. The crew filmed the footage I already had. The pry marks on the gate, the cut wiring, the clip of someone placing barrels on my driveway. The reporter interviewed the city inspector, who confirmed multiple false calls had been made. The piece aired on a Tuesday evening, and exposure transformed hesitation into support. Neighbors who had been unsure suddenly offered practical help. Someone left a toolbox at my gate with a note that said, "Use it for repairs, enough." Others offered to testify if needed. Karen reacted predictably by hiring a lawyer and filing for an injunction claiming harassment and emotional distress. Her complaint sounded impressive on paper but came without corroborating proof. I filed a counterclaim for trespass, vandalism, and defamation and turned my organized evidence over to my attorney. The judge scheduled a hearing and requested sworn statements and police report. The contrast between her rhetorical flourishes and my concrete files felt like the difference between rumor and record. I hosted a small, low-key barbecue to demonstrate ordinary use. Neighbors came with chairs and salads, kids splashed under supervision, and people chatted casually near the pool. Karen did not attend. She texted some vague excuse. The gathering wasn't theatrical, but it worked. The scene showed that my pool operation was safe and mundane, not the public health disaster she'd painted. Several neighbors signed statements describing what they'd seen and, in one case, a retired teacher offered to testify about Karen's history of exaggeration. At the hearing, the strength of documentation matters more than volume. My attorney presented video evidence, police logs, the inspector's records, and the forged documents. Karen's counsel offered emotive declarations but little that linked her to the acts of sabotage. The judge denied Karen's injunction request and noted that filing false reports is a serious matter, ordering that no one enter my property without written permission and suggesting the prosecutor review the pattern of complaints. Afterward, the city prosecutor called to say they were pursuing charges for filing false police reports and tampering with property. A detective traced submissions back to a printer associated with the account making the complaint. When officers executed a search warrant at Karen's house, they recovered items from my missing supply and materials that connected her to the forged paperwork. It wasn't cinematic revenge. It was municipal procedure. Evidence followed leads and led to accountability. The process cost time and money. Repair bills for wiring and pumps, hours on the phone, and days responding to subpoenas. It was exhausting, but neighbors pitched in. A teenager who lives down the block volunteered to fix the fence for free, a contractor offered a reduced rate to reinstall the pump, and someone left a thermos and a note for the long calls. The community shifted. People who had whispered turned into witnesses. Support proved to be practical and quiet rather than performative. I learned to set better boundaries for myself. When provoked, I no longer rushed to reply on the neighborhood thread. I saved the post, documented it, and let counsel handle formal responses. Silence paired with a recorded statement and an attorney's letter became a strategy. It felt odd to trade immediate retorts for methodical responses, but it worked. Systems like the courthouse and municipal offices are slow but relentless if you feed them facts. Karen didn't vanish quietly. She pressed objections and maintained a social media presence that attempted to spin the narrative. But without the fog of rumor, her supporters grew cautious. People began asking for proof before taking side. A few apologized for believing her posts initially. A local business owner offered to help cover part of the repair costs. Momentum shifted because evidence accumulates in a way that feelings cannot erase. When the judge issued fines and ordered protections for my property, the outcome felt procedural rather than dramatic. The city proceeded with misdemeanor charges related to forged documents and wasted emergency resources. Those papers felt like closure, not a spectacle but a formal ending to the pattern of harassment. The pump was replaced with stronger wiring and better locks. The gate latch was upgraded. The camera angles were adjusted to remove blind spots. Practical fixes, not theatrical victory. There were small, human moments that mattered more than court language. A neighbor who brought samosas after a long day of filing, the little kid with glitter glue who made a thank you card, an elderly woman who shared a story about her own long-ago feud and laughed until we both did. These gestures reminded me that community is made up of ordinary kindness, and it's those small bonds that dissolve the effectiveness of manufactured outrage. Sometimes I think about Karen walking her dog with a face that has lost its easy outrage. I felt no gloating, only a tired recognition that she had spent energy building a persona that collapsed when the record was laid bare. Accountability isn't cruelty, it's consequence. I wanted the resolution to be about restoring peace, not about piling shame. The pool remains open on a limited schedule with a modest fee to discourage gatecrashers and to cover ongoing maintenance. The kids still swim, parents still chat, the yard still smells of lemon oil and sunscreen on warm evenings. There are no parades, only ordinary contentment. A repaired pump, a secured gate, neighbors who wave rather than whisper. In the end, the tools that protected what was mine weren't dramatic acts of cleverness but patient, civic processes. Taking photos, filing reports, keeping copies, and letting institutions do what they're designed to do. If someone asks how to survive a neighbor siege, I give the same advice I followed. Document everything, be patient, and let the proper channels translate chaos into record. Entitlement feeds on silence and on gaps. Fill those gaps with facts and the noise falls away. Several weeks passed with a new kind of quiet. Not the earlier, creepy silence that signaled sabotage. This was the kind of quiet people earn. The neighborhood regained its normal rhythm. Sprinklers hissed across lawns in predictable arcs, kids rode bikes without parental paranoia, and the pool became what it always should have been, a place to cool off, not a battleground. I actually started to forget what Karen's shouting sounded like. That alone felt like progress. The court case wrapped with a fine and mandatory community service for her. It wasn't prison time or a dramatic courtroom gasp, but accountability rarely arrives with a soundtrack. The biggest change wasn't the legal verdict, it was the social one. Neighbors who once gave her attention now gave her distance. Her Facebook sermons about civic duty got 1 or 2 pity reactions instead of a comment section full of pitchforks. She'd lost her audience. I almost thought that would be the end. Almost. One humid afternoon, I was refilling chlorine tablets when I saw a for sale sign hammered into Karen's yard. Bold red letters. Newly painted post. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to untangle the mix of relief and whiplash. She hadn't mentioned moving. She hadn't hinted at retreat. Karen stepping back felt too logical for someone who clung to chaos like a personality trait. I spotted her on the porch supervising a couple painting interior walls. She froze when she noticed me, hesitated, then gave a stiff, reluctant wave. Not friendly. Not even neutral. More like acknowledgement that the war was officially pointless. I raised a hand back, telling myself this was closure. Awkward, overdue closure, but closure nonetheless. That night, the neighborhood group page exploded with speculation. Some said the legal trouble had embarrassed her into leaving. Some whispered that the HOA, which still didn't exist here, rejected her attempts to form one. A few joked that the real estate listing should include the bonus feature of a pool you can stare at but not swim in. I didn't join the chatter. Let the crowd narrate the epilogue. I had earned a break from starring in it. The sign changed to under contract 3 days later. The packing truck arrived soon after. I watched boxes stack like tiny monuments to surrender. Her son climbed into the car quietly, probably relieved to leave the parental battlefield. Karen was the last to get in. Before she closed the door, she turned and looked at my yard, specifically the pool, and her face twisted into a final expression of resentment, the kind people reserve for grudges they pack along like luggage. Then the door shut. The car rolled away. Silence followed. I stood by the water's edge and let that silence soak in. Peace. Not the fragile kind you tiptoe around, but the durable version you build after storms. I felt taller somehow. Stronger in the kind of way that doesn't show in a mirror. Owning boundaries changes people. 2 months later, the new owners moved in. A couple with a golden retriever so loved, he probably had a fan club. They introduced themselves immediately and asked if I liked barbecue. They invited me for dinner before they even finished unpacking. On their first full weekend in the house, the dog ran straight through the open gate and belly flopped into my pool like he had been rehearsing for this moment his entire life. We laughed until the sun set, and I gave them a free lifetime membership to the pool. No passes required. Everything was good, normal, predictable, until I received a letter from the title company. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't spam. It was a notice of encumbrance. Karen, weeks before moving, had attempted one last parting shot. She filed a bogus claim asserting that my pool shared a historic access easement with her property. It had no legal teeth, but removing it from the record required paperwork and fees. A bureaucratic mosquito bite, small but designed to itch. My attorney handled it within a day. The claim dissolved like cheap ink in rain. But that letter reminded me of something important. Karen's mindset wasn't unique. Entitlement doesn't die. It relocates. Some other neighborhood would soon learn the joy of hearing her complain that the sky wasn't HOA-approved blue. That realization didn't frustrate me. It inspired me. I had learned more during this feud than in years of casual living. I learned how to stand firm without throwing punches, how to use rules to create fairness instead of control, how to turn small conflicts into boundaries that protect long-term peace. And I realized those lessons could be useful to others facing their own Karens and clipboard crusaders. So, I started writing. Not rants. Not revenge logs. A guide. A very practical one. I titled it, How to Survive a Neighborhood Tyrant, a Homeowner's Field Manual. Each chapter focused on one truth I had earned the hard way. Document everything, use real authorities not gossip, distinguish law from loud voices, and know when to escalate to professionals. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't petty. It was smart. I shared early drafts with neighbors, and they loved it. A local community group asked if I'd speak at their monthly meeting. I did. People took notes. They asked questions. They told stories of their own Karens and Kens, and overreaching busybodies who believed property lines were suggestions. I watched strangers exhale as if someone finally said, "Hey, you're not crazy." This happens everywhere. What started as a messy backyard conflict became a way to help others navigate similar storms without losing sleep or sanity. I donated all profits from the published version to a legal aid fund helping homeowners defend against harassment. The first check paid to the fund felt better than any petty comeback I'd ever delivered. On summer evenings now, I sit by the pool with a drink, listening to kids splash and the dogs snore under the patio table. The air smells like sunscreen and cut grass. There's laughter without tension, water without conflict. Every now and then, I glance at the fence and remember how it once shook under Karen's ladder. Instead of anger, I feel gratitude. She didn't win anything, not fines, not access, not control. But she gave me something unexpected: purpose. What began as entitlement trying to take what was mine ended with me protecting not just my home, but others like it. My pool didn't become a community resource the way she wanted. But my experience did. And somewhere, far away, Karen is probably telling her new neighbors about an injustice involving a pool she could see but never swim in. And when she reaches the part where she tried everything and still failed, she'll probably leave out the truth that matters most. You can only bully people who believe silence is the only option. I don't stay silent anymore. The water reflects the porch lights as I take one last look across the yard. Calm, perfect ripples glide to the edge but never spill over. Balance. Ownership. Peace earned, not granted. My pool is private. My boundaries are respected. My summer is mine again. And that is the best victory anyone can have.